What is up, guys? My name is Nash and welcome back to another video. And a little while ago, I made a video where I talked about my finance degree. And at the time, I was getting ready to graduate. I believe I was graduating in about 2 weeks from that time. And now I graduated back in May, and it's been 5-6 months. And one of the things I've been doing is looking back at the classes that I was taking. And now I kind of have a different picture when it comes to those classes, especially my finance classes, right? And what I like to do sometimes is kind of look back and see if I'm actually using what I learned in school at my job. And the answer changes over time because sometimes you do things that you have to think about what you learned in college and apply that. And sometimes it's just you have to learn something new. All right, so what I'm going to be doing in this video is talk about the finance classes that I took and what I think about them, and especially how my views have changed ever since I graduated and I have more professional experience, so I can look back on those classes and have a whole different opinion from what I had on the other video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my transcript on the screen here, and you guys are going to see every class I took. I'm just going to be focusing on the finance classes that I took, but you can look at my transcript and maybe have an idea of what classes you want to take, or if you get inspired, I don't know, use it however you want to use it, but I want to show you guys. All right, so as you can see on the transcript here, you can see that I started college back in 2016. And I actually didn't take any finance classes until the spring of 2019. And I believe this was the end of my junior year. And so you just couldn't take finance classes before then because there are classes that you have to take before you take your major classes, right? So if you look here in spring of 2019, I took 2 finance classes. So we have Principles of Business Finance, and we also have Money and Banking. So going back to Principles of Business Finance, this is a class that's a basic finance class, right? All right, so this class is going to build your foundation in finance. So you learn everything from things like the future value, things like the interest rates, all the basics of finance. You get a little bit of introduction to the financial statements. You kind of just brush over them, but you get exposed to them, right? If I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of colleges require you to take these principles of finance class if you are a business major. So you might be an accounting major, but you also have the option to take this class because it's really good for everybody, honestly. So this is a great class. It covers literally almost everything in finance, but it is a beginner level class. So nothing is going to be really complicated. It's pretty straightforward. Now moving on to the next class, which is Money and Banking. So for this class, you're pretty much learning about money and banking. So anything related to money and anything related to banking. All right, so pretty easy class as well. This is one of those beginner classes. All right, so looking back, I can see that by taking Principles of Business Finance, I was actually learning money and banking as well, right? Principles of Business Finance pretty much covers money and banking. So you're learning the same thing twice, right? So I was at a point where I would go from my Principles of Business Finance class going into my money and banking class. And I was learning the same thing in both classes. And I was always thinking that those 2 classes can be one class. So those classes could easily be combined into one class. And but they like to separate those classes so they can make more money. So moving on to the next semester, which was the fall of 2019, you can see that I started taking a lot more finance classes. So on the top, we had intermediate accounting for finance majors. I also took intermediate corporate finance. I also took principles of investment. I also took introduction to international finance. I also took computer modeling of finance applications. So this is pretty much using Microsoft Excel to create a bunch of models. So going to the top here, as you can see, the first class is intermediate of accounting for finance majors. So this is pretty much like another accounting class, right? So if you already took accounting, this is going to be super easy and repetitive. And the only difference is you pretty much focus on the financial statements, such as, cash flow, income statement. And you're going to be learning how those documents are put together, and you get to learn how they do the math. So that's the accounting part. And then the finance part is, just focusing on those documents, which is pretty repetitive because you also learn this information in the next class, which is intermediate corporate finance. So intermediate corporate finance is pretty much an extension of Principles of Business Finance. So we literally used the same book. So in Principles of Finance, we got to chapter 13. And when I started taking intermediate corporate finance, we just started on the next chapter, which was chapter 14. So it's pretty much the same class, just cut in half. And this finance class pretty much focuses on corporate finance. So you're not really learning about, personal finance and stocks and all of that. Specifically, you're pretty much focusing on corporate finance, which is a little more difficult. So it makes sense to separate those classes. So the principles of finance and then the intermediate corporate finance. So that makes sense to separate those classes. And I really did appreciate that, because if those two classes were combined into one class, yeah, that would definitely be a lot of information. And, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would fail because, it's just so much information. So when you get to intermediate corporate finance, that's when it starts to get a little difficult. And the next one is principles of investment. So this is kind of like an introduction to those who want to get into investment banking or investment finance or anything related to that. So you pretty much learn everything about investing. This includes things like stocks, options. So that's one thing I really did appreciate, learning about options, because I wasn't really familiar with those. And if you've been introduced to options, you know how complicated they are and how confusing they get. So taking that class really helped me understand how options work. And the next one is Introduction to International Finance. This is another intro class as well, if you want to get into like international financial markets. So in this class, you pretty much learn everything about international finance. And if I'm being honest, I never really cared about this international finance class. It was really difficult for a class that I didn't care about, but you pretty much learn everything about international finance. So this includes things like currency, and a bunch of other things that are related to like international markets. Not really much to say about this class. And the last one is computer models of finance application or financial applications. So for this class, this was the most interesting class because I'm a huge fan of Microsoft Excel. And this was probably my favorite class because you got to practice everything you learned, right? So one of the things I could do in this class was pretty much build a model of maybe an income statement. And you can make that model create projections of, profit, expenses, anything really. So this class kind of like brought it all together. So if you learned anything from the other previous finance classes, you can build a model to express what you learned, right? This was one of my favorite classes. It taught me so much about Microsoft Excel. If you work in finance, you know that these models make everything so much easier. So instead of spending a week trying to put together projections for the next year, and you do it every single year when you do projections, you can simply sacrifice maybe 24 hours to build a model that does it for you. And anytime after that, all you got to do is put in, the known variables or the numbers that and the model is going to do its thing and project the rest of it. So it makes everything so much easier and faster and accurate. You don't have a lot of mistakes. All right. So these classes were the most unique classes that I took, except for intermediate accounting for finance major, because that was a repetition of the accounting classes that I took and the finance classes that I took before then. But other than that, the corporate finance class was really good. The principles of investment, that was really good. International finance, even though I hated the class, it was still a great class because I was learning new things. And we also had my financial modeling class, which was really great as well. All right, so now moving on to the last semester, as you can see, I took business finance for entrepreneurs. All right, so this class was designed for those who have goals of being an entrepreneur. So you pretty much learn everything from basic accounting and all the way to, advanced finance. So if you think about it, it's kind of like a repetition of, all the classes that you took, because I started with accounting and I went on to those finance classes. So this class kind of like combines it all into like one package, how to be an entrepreneur, how do you run your business, how do you create financial models, how do you create projections, how do you see if your business is profitable or not. So it's kind of like, a repetitive class, but I think it's really good for those who want to be entrepreneurs, especially if you're taking it the last year of college, because that's the last thing you're going to learn and you're going to take the most away from it if you really want to be an entrepreneur. The next one was Introduction to Risk Management. This was a really great class when it came to kind of like learning how to manage risk when it comes to finance. So if you work in finance, you know that risk is one of the biggest things that companies focus on, because if a company exposes itself to a lot of risks, there's so many types of risk. It might lead to legal action. Just a lot of bad things can happen if you're not managing your risk. So this class was pretty much designed to teach students how to manage risk. It's impossible to avoid risk at all. So the best thing you can do is learn how to manage it. And I think it did a great job. And the next one was international finance. finance. I already took this class. I was retaking it for a better grade. I just hated the class so much that I didn't do well. So I decided to take the class again so I could get a better grade. And the next one is cases and problems in finance. So this is another repetitive class, similar to finance for entrepreneurs. So this class pretty much goes over everything you learned over the years. So you get a case that says, for example, they might say, here's a case where a company has these financial documents. Your job is to fix the documents, right? So find what's wrong with this income statement, find something wrong with this statement of cash flow. So you kind of like get to work on cases, right? So cases that there's something wrong with the case. Your job is to figure out what it is and to find the right answer. So, which is pretty cool because you kind of like get to refresh your memory and your mind, your knowledge, in terms of finance. But at the same time, this is repetitive again, because you're pretty much, doing the things you learned in principles of finance, corporate finance, accounting for finance majors, money and banking. So all that information is combined into one. So that was my last finance class. As you can see, there were only, let me count this. I only took about 10 different finance classes, and about half of those are just repetitive. Alright, so I believe that, the information that you learn in those 10 classes can be condensed into 5 classes, cut them in half. You still learn the same information for a cheaper price, but, universities don't do that. They want to keep you for as long as they can. That's, you pay more in tuition. And all of that good stuff, what they do to make more money. Yeah, so that is pretty much it. I kind of like wanted to go over those finance classes so you guys can have an idea if you're planning on taking similar classes. But that is pretty much it for this video. Let me know if you guys have any questions, if you want to add anything else. But I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.